After finishing late for work one night, a lady was walking home. It was around midnight, and this night in particular had an eerie feel to it. The lady clutched her purse tightly and began to pick up her pace. She lived in an apartment that had an elevator. Feeling relieved to finally arrive at her building, the lady began to relax. She entered the elevator, and just as the doors were about to close, a strange hooded man with a dark red coat stuck his foot in the elevator, which caused the doors to reopen. He apologized for startling the lady and then asked which floor she required, all the while avoiding any eye contact with the lady. She responded, trying not to sound nervous, and the man pressed her floor and the one below. On the way up, the man asked her if he could use her cell phone, but she refused and said her battery was dead, as she was suspicious of the man. She then isolated herself in the corner of the elevator. After an uncomfortable silence, the elevator finally stopped at the floor below the one the lady was headed to. The hooded man slowly began to walk out the door, and then suddenly turned around, facing the lady and the elevator, and just stared at the lady without any movement. The doors slowly began to close, and just before they closed, the lady saw the man running towards the upstairs, pulling a knife out of his jacket. My grandfather died 3 days ago. The security guard that resides in our neighborhood knocked on our door this morning. He said that an elderly man came by our house earlier in the day and had stayed for around 15 minutes and left. We asked him what the elderly man wanted. He told us that the elderly man said he wanted to say goodbye to someone he was unable to meet recently. We figured it must be one of Granddad's friends coming to pay his respects. But after some discussion amongst ourselves, we were perplexed as to who this could be, or who this man could have been looking for. We invited the security guard in for a cup of tea to try and get to the bottom of who this person was. I made a cup of tea and brought it into the living room. The security guard took his tea and went to sit down on the sofa. He was just about to start giving us a more detailed description of this man when he turned pale white and his hands started to shake, spilling some of the tea on the rug. He shouted, "That's the old man," pointing at a picture of my grandfather on the mantelpiece, directly opposite the sofa. My whole family was frozen stiff. We still don't know if the security was telling the truth, but the thought of my grandfather coming to say his goodbyes to my newborn sister before resting in peace is something I like to believe is true. Last year, I had a job working night shift as a palliative care RN in an enormous nursing home. The nursing home had been around for a very long time. It is necessary to mention that the nursing home and the religious institution that was in authority is still to this day under investigation for its involvement into child abuse allegations. The nurses that had been working there since before this investigation used to often tell stories to the newest members of staff about the times when it used to be used as a children's home. In particular, they mentioned that at this time, when children died in the home, they were usually buried in the rose garden, and that this rose garden was currently buried beneath the new wing of the nursing home. On numerous occasions during my years working at this home, I would have terminally ill, elderly patients wake up in the middle of the night shouting and screaming, asking me to please remove the naughty little girl in the room, or please tell the little boy to stop watching them from the end of the bed. He keeps staring at me. The fact that this was a huge, old, dark and creepy building that had such a morbid past, and then this regular occurrence with the elderly staff, meant that most of the staff refused to do their rounds alone whenever this would happen. We were all terrified of that place. It felt so cold and empty. I was far from the only person this happened to either. It was a regular occurrence until I decided I'd had enough and left the job. I remember this one story told to me by my school teacher. This story I found particularly disturbing, and it has stayed with me till this day. My teacher said that when she was a child, sometime back in the 70s, she had found herself home alone one day. She heard a knock on the door, and she did as she was taught, and opened her main door while keeping her screen door locked. The man who was at the door told her he was from the gas company and wanted to read her gas meter, and then asked if her parents were home. No sooner had the words no left her mouth when the man, without missing a beat, began to force his way into her home. Once he found the screen door locked, he pulled out a freaking box cutter, started to slice through the screen aggressively. My teacher said she ran straight upstairs, straight into her parents' room, and hid in a clothes hamper inside of her parents' closet. She said she stayed there silently for around 15 minutes before, to her relief, she heard sirens getting louder and louder heading towards her home. She heard multiple footsteps in her home and a stranger's voice calling her name. Although she knew it must have been the police, when she opened her mouth to reply, nothing came out. They eventually found her in the hamper, wide-eyed and shaking like a leaf, before she burst into tears. Thank God, a neighbour who lived across the street happened to see the whole event taking place and immediately called for the police. She still worries about what would have happened if she hadn't reacted as quickly as she did. The worst part of this story, that still creeps her out to this day, is that the police found the intruder still hiding in the attic. A year or two ago, my brother started to receive a call on his cell phone, always between 2 and 3 a.m. each night. When he answered, he was met by this creepy sounding noise. It was like screaming and static mixed together. After a month or so of this, he would change his number and it would stop. Then, just like clockwork, after a week or so of receiving his new number, the calls would start again at the exact same time. After he had had enough of this, concluding it was probably one of his close friends trying to prank him, he decided to call the number back. An old man answered who had no clue what he was talking about or what he was accusing him of, but still, the calls would continue. When he chose not to answer, it would ring back a few times and then stop. No messages were ever left. After some time, he decided to end his contract with the phone company, switch providers, and get another number. But as you may have guessed, the static screaming started again after a short time. By this time, he had started to worry, unsure of why this was happening. When he decided to dial back the number this time, he got a completely different person on the line. Shortly after this, he ended up losing his job as well as his phone, so naturally, the calls stopped as his phone was disconnected. Things went back to normal after that, until some time after, my mum asked me to listen to a creepy message she had gotten on our house phone. Sure enough, it was the same creepy caller. We decided to let my brother know after some discussion, because we knew it had caused him some distress. When we did, he immediately started panicking. He ran to the phone, dialed back the number, and just started staring blankly into space. This was a year or two ago, and my brother has never been the same since. He never explained what was said or what he had heard on the phone that day. Nowadays, he doesn't socialise at all, has lost all his friends, and spends all day in his room. He soon after finished with his girlfriend and hasn't dated again since. Nowadays, he doesn't seem to care about his appearance and barely has an appetite. And also, around once or twice a week, he wakes up out of bed screaming at the top of his lungs. What on earth did he hear to make him like this?